That is actually a really like amazing segue back because Allison was y'all must be intuitives on this call. Allison mentioned that we're all kind of mirrors of each other, right? And that like certain people are kind of put in our world to either show us the great love that we have for ourselves or that we could potentially have for ourselves or as triggers. Do you think that as you were saying or like kind of alluding to of it's it things make like end up presenting not because you've got a problem because there's something else, right? Do you think that this will ever sort of end, that mirroring or that like fail safe triggering, however we want to label it, could ever cease and in a conscious life? Because obviously, if we all
Yeah.
like go to source, then yes, it'll stop. But like in a conscious level,
I think on a mental health level, I can see it kind of evening out because to me, our emotions, for example, which are a very big part of our mental health, is essentially messages from the soul, and the different things that we feel or the different mental illnesses that we experience are essentially survival strategies that are letting us know like, hey, this isn't aligned with your soul's growth, with what's going on. And so it's expressing itself as a way to let you know like you need to realign, or there's things that you need to do to like come back to yourself, come back to the source within yourself. And so I do think that it is a possible thing, but I think that also as humans we have to remember that like in order for that to happen, humans have to really accept that like part of being human is feeling, and sometimes feeling is very, very uncomfortable and can cause all these other things. So I think that there has to be a bit more collective growth and more understanding of being human, because right now everyone's on this, a lot of people are on this kick of like, I just want to feel happy, I don't want to feel stressed, I don't want to feel anxious at all. And I'm always like, you're going to feel anxious, it's part of being human. And then in the next Inside Out movie, anxiety is one of the emotions, and I'm like, yes, it is. It's yes, thank you.
we're so excited for that. I'm
I
so
am. I'm
excited.
so pumped. I'm like, yes, June. Um, but yeah, so I don't, I can see it as a possibility. I just think that for a lot of people, it's also just a way to like let us know like, hey, we're not like fully aligned. Like there's some things to focus on. Um, yeah, I think that answered the question good enough. I don't want to too much.
Yes. Nichole, do you like emotions? Are they valuable?
Oh gosh, I feel like that's such a trick question. Yes and no. Sometimes emotions are big, sometimes they're heavy, sometimes they're hard. Um, gosh, last weekend, I think I mentioned it to Anna Marie in a voice message. My son, we were watching Inside Out and he came out crying over Bing Bong. Like after we'd finished the movie, I'm like, wow, you're having a lot of really big emotions right now, aren't you? And so sometimes those big emotions are hard to navigate, whether they're our own, whether they're our children's or people that we love. But but yeah, I mean, I would say like they're necessary, right? That's what lets us know that we're human and not robots, is we can feel sad and we can feel happy and we can have all these other feelings that we don't quite understand. And that just lets us know that we're like having the human experience. And that I think it also lets us know again when we're on path or when we're most aligned and when we're not. And maybe we don't know why in that moment, but it's a good indicator for us to kind of step back and look at it and say, okay, why is this coming up? Why am I feeling this way? And you might not figure it out in that moment, but maybe it'll come to you the next day or a week later, right? I mean, I mentioned having, a struggle since last year, and not until recently did I realize, and I'm sure someone else could have put two and two together, for me much more quickly, but it eventually came to me, oh, okay, this is why this was going on. And so I think they're there to teach us and to help us teach others, right? We have to teach these to our little ones, whether they're little ones that we're working with or they're little ones that we're molding into little human beings. So
You think
yeah, I
that
would say they're
do you think that we are efficient at figuring out our emotions? Because I mean, we're animals, right? We're mammals in the classification at least, and like we absolutely would say that our dogs, our cats, whales, dolphins, they all have emotions, right? Scorpions and other, reptiles probably have emotions too.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that we are efficient and effective in not, let's not go into communication because that's a flat out no. But like in feeling them, do you think that we're effective beings?
I think it depends. I think some of us are better at it than others. I'm just gonna go out and say it that women are probably better at it than men because, when we're growing up, we're allowed to feel our emotions as little girls more so than little boys are. And so I think we are able to do that a little bit better than they are. I don't think we're always good at understanding though the why or even the correct emotion, right? And I don't mean to man bash, but like I'll pick on men for this, where men, think like, oh, I'm so angry, or you think that man is so angry. And when you start digging, well, really they're just sad and they don't know how to express that sadness or even feel safe to express it or feel safe to say I'm sad. And so what does it look like? It ends up looking like anger, substance use, alcohol use. And so I don't think we're always good at maybe the core issue, right? What's the core emotion? What's the core feeling? Sometimes we are, but that also takes a lot of practice. Right, and really tuning in, "Okay, what am I feeling? When have I felt this way before? Oh, okay, I remember feeling this way when I was 15. Well, what was going on for me when I was 15? Oh, my parents got divorced, and I was feeling really, scared or confused, and I didn't know what was happening," right? And so that takes a lot of practice because as clinicians, and I'm gonna say, Alison and Anna Marie, you guys have probably seen this too, someone comes in and you know right off the bat what's going on with them. And when you give that to them, because it's so obvious to us, they're like, "Wait, what? No, that I never realized that." And you realize that in, 10 minutes. But it takes that practice, right? We know that because we've been doing it, because we've practiced with people. They don't know that because they haven't maybe even felt safe enough to stop to look at it, or they were too scared to see what might have come up, or just not even having the awareness that this is different because maybe everybody else in their family is this way, and they just think that, well, I'm just like everybody else in my family. There's nothing wrong with me. So yeah, I think there's so much there, so much to unpack, I think.
Allison, do you like feelings?
I do like feelings. I've always been such a deep feeler.
Do you
Uh,
feel like you're good at it, or do you just feel like you're deep?
no,
Like,
I recently have had like someone say something that was very interesting to me because I've always been someone who like I could just cry for like hours. Like I remember in high school I would just like sit in my bedroom and cry about like some like silly thing that just like didn't need to be cried about for like an hour. And so I'm really good at like feeling them. Like I'm not someone who like feels like doesn't feel safe enough to, or like feels embarrassed about feeling. Like I've never had that issue, but someone said something recently and I thought it was very interesting, which is that sometimes like your feelings only really supposed to last like 90 seconds, and when it lasts longer than that, it's actually like your mind is perpetuating it. So I do think that there's sort of, I do have like a tendency to, it's almost like I enjoy feeling a lot, and it like it makes me feel alive or something. I don't know, but like then I'll just keep perpetuating like playing stuff in my mind that will keep that feeling going so I like fully feel it, which I feel like sometimes can be helpful like if I need to get something out, but sometimes it is sort of doing me a disservice because it's like, okay, like you've already felt the emotion. You can sort of like move on and kind of ground into like, okay, like ground back into the body. Like I a lot of times will perpetuate it in my mind, which I think a lot of the issues in terms of like what we were just talking about with people being able to feel and being good at feeling is the fact that we're like overriding just feeling with like what the mind wants to do. So does the mind want to surpass it? Does the mind want to play into it? Does the mind want to overthink it and analyze it, right? So like how many times are we actually just allowing ourselves to like feel before doing actually like that inner work or like understanding where it comes from? Because even that, which is so important, is again like sort of the mind taking control instead of actually just allowing yourself to express in like a safe space.
Does what you're expressing, are you limiting that to just the more what we would quote negative or denser feelings and emotions? Or like when you were saying, you know, wherever like you read it or saw it or whatever, that like you should be feeling your feelings only about 90 seconds and then kind of move on. Do you think that that also applies to like quote the good feelings?
That's interesting. I've never actually thought about that.
Because then technically,
I
if
know.
that's the case, anybody who is like madly happy all the time
I
is
know.
actually psychotic.
Yeah, that's so true. Like we
by
shouldn't
that
be
look, right?
perpetuating our happiness, which I definitely do try to do.
Which,
Yeah,
you
it's
know, I like
interesting.
the face wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, right?
Yeah, I think that I do think that because some of those harder emotions like sadness, anger are sort of like that heavier energy, it doesn't serve us to be in them for as long versus it does serve us to be in like joy, gratitude, love, happiness. Like it serves us in terms of like attracting more of what we want and stepping more into the version of ourselves that we want to embody, like all of that kind of stuff. So I do think it's like, it's not that one is right or wrong, but I think that at some point, like sitting in those emotions can create thought patterns and yeah, that aren't truly serving us. So I think that it serves us best for those types of emotions to like let them fully be expressed and then continue to move forward, just like in terms of like how we show up in our lives and like yeah, like just I think it serves us more to sort of feel and then try to get to those higher energies and like be in those higher energies for longer versus with like happiness it's like that's actually it is serving you to be in happiness for a long time because you're attracting more of that then versus like attracting more of those denser energies.
Yeah. Anna Marie, I think I already know the answer. Do you like emotions? Do you think we're efficient?
Uh, I I like emotions. I like other people's emotions. I like helping other people with their emotions. My own emotions, I I, I know, I know. But if
That's
I'm
a no.
well, okay. So, this is me being honest. I think so for most of my life, actually people used to call me stoic. Like before I became a therapist, before I had Scarlett, I was like, they were like, you just don't I keep my emotions very close to my chest. Like I don't like to share them. I don't like people seeing me cry. In fact, I get angry when I let myself cry in front of other people. I'm like, ugh, get it together. And I think for me, it's it's been a growing process for me to get comfortable with my emotions because I do love them. They're something that they tell me they make life more vibrant. Like without emotions, it would just be dull and gray. And it tells me a little bit more. But I very much keep my emotion. I try to keep my emotions on a leash. And growing up, it was not acceptable to feel certain emotions without a legitimate cause. So feeling angry was unacceptable unless somebody had truly like there was a terrible injustice that was done. Feeling sad needed to have something so severe, and if you did feel sad it had to be for like 2 seconds. I remember when my partner passed away, a month like he it had been a month since he passed away, and I was crying on the porch, and my dad came home from work and he was like, what's wrong? Oh my gosh, what's wrong? And my mom was sitting trying to comfort me and she was like, Brian. And my dad was like, still? Like he's and I looked up at him, and that's just kind of like the way that I grew up. And so getting comfortable with emotions has been a journey for me. Like I've always been able to make space for other people. I've always been very understanding, and being able to be a support system has been something that I have always loved. But for my own emotions, it has not been something, it's something that makes my body a lot of times feel very unsafe. So I've had to do a lot of nervous system work around letting myself actually feel and process emotion. Do I feel that people as humans do emotions well? Absolutely not. We absolutely do not. And partially it's because of the conditioning. Yes, men were not allowed to feel feelings. Women were not allowed to feel angry because it's aggressive. And even we put these stereotypes on different emotions. Like anger is an aggressive emotion. Anger is a passionate emotion. It is an emotion that is like, hey, you are alive, and I care about me being alive, so let's like do something so that we can stay being alive because a boundary was crossed. And sadness is actually, everyone is like, oh, I don't want to feel sad. Sadness is your soul asking for community. And so it's okay for you to let yourself be sad. It kind of like cleanses it. I always see sadness as kind of like water. It's very cleansing if you actually let yourself dive into it and then let yourself be supported. But a lot of times what happens also as humans is that we are so hard on emotions and so against emotions and feel so unnatural with them that we create these narratives around them similar to what Alison said. It's not that the emotions are bad. It's not that feeling the emotions are bad. It's not even that being sad for a day or whatever that you find yourself is bad. It's the narratives that we stick to it, because then our bodies can't tell or our brains can't tell the difference between a lived and non-lived experience. So if you're picturing these terrible things over and over again, and your mind is creating a narrative like, okay, I'm sad because this thing didn't work out, and then your brain's like, oh, look, you're not successful, this means this, this, and this, it's going to limit you being able to move forward because you're almost like blocking yourself. So I don't think that we do emotions very well because we have a lot of restrictions, we have a lot of assumptions and stereotypes about emotions. Animals, when they're scared, after they experience something traumatic and they're scared, they like shake. They have like this physical thing to try to help them move forward, and then they move forward. And yes, their brains are different than ours, but like it's just one of those things where we just limit ourselves, and we think that we have to stay in the happy emotions all of the time, and you don't have to. So I don't think that we do emotions very well. And that's no hate, no shade, no pink lemonade to the human race, but it's just I do emotions well with other people. I help other people really great, but with my own emotions, I'm like, oh man, I'm so sad about this, and it's really disappointing that I'm sad about it. So yeah.
Nichole, Anna Marie mentioned something that got me thinking about Eckhart Tolle, and I'm curious as to your thoughts around this. So Anna Marie said that like emotions are what gives our world color, and that if we were just kind of like flatlined, no emotions, it would just be gray. A lot of people like kind of look at people like Eckhart Tolle, who was like, yep, I sat on a bench for 2 years and I came out, and he's basically like monotone. And if I don't know if you've ever watched anything of his, but when he is doing an interview, he is very flat affect. His tone is a very even. There is no inflection. At least I've never, in like all of the interviews and stuff that I've seen, he even reads his book like chapter by chapter, one of his books, on YouTube, and the tone never changes. It's incredible. Do you, in your opinion, believe that a person can truly be feeling an emotion if it's not presenting in a like physical way?
Can they, um, I think so. So can they feel an emotion if they're not presenting it?
Yeah, like if I was just sitting here like this and just
Yeah.
talking to you, and I told you that I was happy, ecstatic even, do you think that you would believe me? Do you think that that's even something that you would maybe not even believe? Maybe belief shouldn't play a part in it, but would you say that I'm actually legitimately feeling it?
I think feelings are like they're on a spectrum, right? So someone could be feeling sad and maybe they're just kind of sitting there, and maybe somebody else is feeling devastated, right? Which is going to be further along on this spectrum. And they might be looking the same, but I think everybody's tolerance for feelings is very different too because of their experiences. So, maybe somebody who has who hasn't had a lot of trauma or a lot of difficulties in life, their happiness might be, every day they're just maybe their happiness is just kind of, somewhere in the middle, right? They're kind of like hanging around 50% because nothing bad's ever happened to them. And then you might have somebody who's had nothing but trauma and difficulties and hardships, and something good happens to them. They might be experiencing that so much more than the other person because it's not very common for them. And so I think it depends on people's experiences. Same thing with like sadness, right? What makes me sad isn't maybe necessarily going to make Anna Marie sad. It doesn't mean that we're maybe both not sad, but we're also going to emote it differently, right? Anna Marie says she doesn't like to cry in front of people. And maybe, and I don't either, but let's just say I had no problem with it. And so we're both feeling the same exact way. Anna Marie's sitting there not crying, and I'm bawling my eyes out, right? I mean, you think of even things like funerals, right? Everybody has such different reactions at funerals also. And so I think it's
Why do
possible
you
for
think?
people. Mhm.
Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I just say I think it's possible for people to have these feelings, and maybe we don't understand it because their internal experience of those feelings is different based on our individual experiences in lives.
Do you think then it's a flaw of the human race that we should like even say then that like emotions can get stuck? Because I kind of feel like, I can on many levels agree with everything that you just said, but then I look at the world and I see a lot of people, a lot of spiritual healers, a lot of intuitives, a lot of therapists being like, well, this emotion is stuck in you. And so now you need to feel it. Well, what is it that is determining that that person didn't, quote, feel it enough? If feeling it is on a spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
like there's a lot of like pressure from a lot of different groups for the feeling so that that energy moves out to be done in a certain way, maybe still on a
Yeah.
spectrum, but still there's a commonality that we have maybe as a society placed on every single emotion.
I think that depends too on what the emotion is, and if the person that is maybe like the sitter that's sitting for the healing is saying, for me, I feel like this emotion is stuck because maybe somebody who has lost a loved someone who's lost, let's think of the worst thing in the world, and as a mother, the worst thing in the world would be to lose a child. And so for me, if that were to happen, I don't think like the grief would be maybe stuck in me forever because that's a big deal. And if I'm going to a healer to say, "Hey, I need help with this because I still really feel it very intently," whereas maybe somebody else is like, I don't want to let go of this grief, so I'm going to let it sit a little bit longer. So I think it depends on, again, on each person who's saying that the emotion is stuck. Is the person feeling it, or the person that lived it? Are they the ones that's saying that it's stuck, or is it somebody else coming in and saying, "Hey, I think you've been sad too long. You have this, feeling of grief stuck in you. Let's get rid of that." And the person's maybe like, I don't want to let go of this feeling because I'm going to feel like I'm betraying my child that I lost if I don't feel this way anymore. So I don't think there's like a nice easy answer, because I think it just really depends on who's saying it, who's making the determination that it's stuck, and is it serving a purpose, it being there.
Anna Marie, I'm going to ask you this, and then I want to hear Allison's perspective on this same question. Nichole had given us an archetype, right, of that person that comes in and like you as like the clinician or the practitioner goes, I know exactly what's wrong with you. And that person goes, really? Let's say it's, well, a person goes in and you're like, oh, you're angry. And they're like, "No, I don't know, like maybe at the time, but like still. How do you like reconcile this topic of conversation that we're having right now
Yeah.
around that individual?
So I guess it's interesting because like I essentially do exactly that with my mental health clarity readings. I'm like, here it is. This is the problem. Good. Here's here's the unprocessed emotion, or here's the thing. But for me, a lot of the times unprocessed emotion is not just about like I don't see it intuitively as just by itself. A lot of times it is wrapped within a specific memory. And with that, I think the reason that we hold on to certain things, even if we're not consciously aware of it, is the body has its own memory, the subconscious has its memory, and then like our energy has its thing that's going on. But I think that it's really a way of trying to survive. So when we experience things that are absolutely heartbreaking or absolutely terrifying, and they make us feel unsafe, there is a lot of times we will store it. And a lot of times when we're in those situations, we also don't let ourselves completely feel the feeling fully, if that makes sense, even if feeling the feeling fully looks different for each person, right? So a lot of times there is a level of like, this feeling is making me feel like I need to be in fight or flight, like I'm going into survival mode. And so we'll kind of lean more onto those coping mechanisms. And I mean, it was it because your point was very good, where it was just like, well, why do we like, how do we hold on to these things? And it is a thing you see all over the place, where people are like, you just need to process your anger. There are also different layers, and I think the one thing that like I see is that sometimes we process a layer or like a surface level part of the issue or an emotion, and it touches just like this one area, but maybe we're still holding on to that anger in a different part of our life. So for me, I remember I had a situation like this, but I was the receiver, where I received a reading, and the person who did the reading was like, I was like, oh no, you're not holding on to any grief. Like you're not holding on to any like grief with your partner passing. And it was like probably 2 years from the time he passed. And I was like, well, then why do I still feel sad about it? Why do I still get sad? And it's not that, so I wasn't storing the emotion in my energy. It's just, that is something that brings up sadness. That is a memory that brings up sadness for me. And it is okay to feel something about something terrible that happened over a period of time. You just don't, when we bury it, it tells our body like, you need to hold on to this. It's not safe to feel. So we're going to hold on to it to remember that this is unsafe. Is this making sense? I hope that sometimes I talk
Yes,
and I'm like, I hope this makes sense. Okay.
absolutely. Allison, what are your thoughts? Do you feel like you can actually feel an emotion if you're not emoting it? And if so, like where in this whole crazy scenario, like why is it that we have placed so much emphasis on quote unquote feeling in a certain way?
Hmm. I do definitely believe that different people need to express it differently. I think that sort of in terms of like when it's getting stuck, it's like how much did you sort of suppress how much it wanted to be expressed, if that makes sense. So like one person might want to express it like, I guess on a scale of 1 to 10, a 10, right? And so if they only felt it at an 8, that it is in some way still going to be stuck because it still wants to be fully felt and fully expressed. And there's part of it that hasn't been processed. And like to me, what that really means too is that there's part of it that also like a specific like lesson hasn't been learned. Like a lot of times we will store stuff because it still needs to teach us something. And when it's sort of like brought up again, it's like, oh, this is the time to look at that again. Like, where do we not fully feel that, but also where do we not fully learn from that in our past so that we can like heal more deeply and grow more into like who we're supposed to be. But then that that same experience can happen to someone, they only want to express that feeling at like an 8, and if they express at an 8, like it maybe just doesn't get stuck because like it was fully expressed for what they needed to express it as and for what they needed to feel and to learn for it to fully be processed. I do also really think that like our body is very much so tied to, like, that's why somatics is so important. It's very much so tied to feeling it. So like I do feel like there's a level of suppression if you're not actually like physically showing it, if that makes sense. So I do feel like there has to be, it's not that you're maybe not feeling it, but there's some level of suppression. Maybe it's just on the physical sort of level. but there is, and so that is likely like they're not fully feeling it. There's something that's not fully being expressed. Um, and it's probably is getting stored and stuck in some way, probably physically, honestly, because they're not expressing it physically. So it's probably getting stored physically somewhere. Um,
I mean, they
yeah.
do have that saying of like the issues are in the tissues and like, you know, like the body remembers, you know. And we have completed part 2 of this mental health edition of the Soul Contract series. I'm so excited for you to see the last part. To tell you, these conversations have been so incredible, and they truly, truly were this very definitive shooting up into the stratosphere for me as far as an interviewer and as a question asker. This one was definitely a mind bender for me. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, and share on this video, and of course, letting everybody else know what you think. I would love for you to check it down in the show notes for the different ways to connect with the panelists and, of course, to see the organizations they are uplifting. All right, guys, it's time. Go and check out the final part of this Soul Contract series of this mental health edition. See you then.